think about your life along 6 or 7 dimensions. Okay, so here's the idea. Imagine you were treating yourself like someone you were taking care of, someone you loved and you were taking care of. Okay, so you want the best for you, whatever that is. So it's not like magic wishes. It's nothing like that. It's you're taking care of yourself like a responsible person. Okay, so then it asks you, write a bit. 3 to 5 years down the road, what do you want your friendship network to look like? How do you want your intimate relationship to be going? Or what should it look like? How are you going to stay educated? How are you going to handle temptations of drugs and alcohol? How are you going to keep yourself healthy mentally and physically? What are your career goals? And what are you going to do with life outside of work? So if you could have what would be good for you, just what would that look like? Okay, people aren't encouraged to take the time to think that through, and it really matters if you think it through. Okay, so then it says, okay, now you've warmed up. Write for 20 minutes about what your life could look like in 3 to 5 years if it was going the way that you wanted it to go. So it'd be good for you. Be good for you, good for your family, good for society. Like, it'd be good. You need a vision. Okay, and then the next step is, okay, now imagine that you let your weaknesses and character flaws get the upper hand and like drive you into the ground. What does that look like in 5 years? So that's like a horrific vision, right? And so that's a good thing because now you got something to run away from. And so if you're anxious, having something bad to run away from is really motivating because you think, well, like maybe I should watch what I eat. It's like, yeah, well, I'd look better. That's not enough motivation. I'm going to be fat and really unhealthy and half dead in 5 years. It's like, okay, that's not so good.
Right.
And so you can run towards the positive thing and run away from the negative thing. And that increases your motivation.
Right.
And then in the next part, you're asked to make that into a detailed and articulated plan. And so that can help. Like you say, well, you're not sure what habits to change or what personality traits to transform. You got to kind of think about that in relationship to what you want. So, if people come to me for clinical work, the first thing I want to find out is, okay, what do you think's wrong? Like, how are you suffering unnecessarily? And but more importantly, if your life was good, what would that look like? What are we aiming at here?
Right.
And that's one of the most crucial things that you can ask yourself in life is, what are you aiming at? And here, there's 2 reasons for that. One is your aim narrows the world, and that reduces your anxiety. You know where you stand and where you're going. And so that calms you down and reduces your stress. It helps you focus. The second thing is the positive emotion systems that make you enthusiastic and engaged. Like, people think of reward as what happens when you achieve something. But that's not exactly right, not with human beings. Most of the time we feel reward engagement and positive, like the positive desire to move forward in life, when there's evidence that we're moving towards a valuable goal. So we're making progress. It's like, yes, we're making progress. There's a real neurochemical kick that comes along with that. It's the same system that cocaine affects and amphetamines. And so with rats, for example, you can get rats hooked on cocaine if they're alone in a cage. And they'll self-administer cocaine till they die. But if they're out doing rat things with their rat buddies, like, they're not that interested in cocaine. So, and the reason I'm saying that is because, like, a rat who's out with his rat buddies doing rat things gets enough reward from that, so the drugs aren't that attractive. So part of the reason that people take drugs like cocaine is because they're not doing enough things that are deeply meaningful, and so, but you don't get meaning unless you got an aim, because your nervous system is wired to give you a pat on the back when you're making progress towards your aim. Well, so you got to have an aim. And like, the aim should be high, because otherwise why bother with it? But it should also be broken down into steps that you have a reasonably high probability of attaining. With a kid, you want to say, well, you're trying to get your kid to develop. You don't give them an impossible task. You give them a task that's slightly harder than that which they can already do. Right? And so they're engaged by that. Maybe they're a little anxious about it, but they master it, and they've expanded their domain of competence. It's no game. It's a big deal to do that. And that kids love that. That's where you learn, in that zone, where you're pushing yourself just a little bit beyond where you are. And so one of the things that you can do that helps focus you and also control your stress is to really, really consciously think through and articulate your aims. You should do a bad job of it. And the reason I'm saying that is because you don't want to be perfectionistic about this. You're not going to be right anyways. You're going to be righter than you are now. Because what do you know? You take a few steps forward 6 months from now, you're not going to be in the same place. And so your vision's going to change a little bit. So there's no sense getting obsessive about your goal. But it really is worthwhile to understand what it is that you're aiming at. People are aiming creatures. That's why we look at each other's eyes, right? That's why you have whites in your eyes, actually. And so that I can see where they're pointing so I can understand what you're up to. So we're aiming creatures. It isn't certain how the future is going to lay itself out. And it isn't certain that what you knew in the past is going to be sufficient for you to move forward into the future. So there's lots of opportunity, but it's very complex. And it's not easy to keep up in our world. You know, like if you look around the world, you might think, well, the happiest people are those where the standard of living is the highest. That's actually not the case.
Right.
And you think, okay, but why wouldn't that be the case? It's like, what do you want? Malaria and death at 40? Obviously not. But then you think, okay, what's the price you pay for a high standard of living? Well, that's easy. You virtually always sacrifice the present for the future. You're always working. I mean, you guys, you're fairly influential and you've got this good thing going, but like it could crash at a moment's notice. You better keep your eye on it. And every day you're thinking, okay, this has to be done and this has to be done and this has to be done. And it pays off. I mean, you have a nice studio and I would presume a reasonably comfortable life, but it's not like you're not running on a treadmill to keep that going. And so that's security and it's health, but it isn't necessarily happiness, and it's certainly not necessarily freedom from anxiety. Sure. And I would say most people in the modern world, weirdly enough, have far too much to do. You know, 2 career families and a couple of kids. It's like, man, you're done. That's 60 hours a week of flat out work. Yeah. So, and that can be too much. And then I also think, because our society is philosophically unstable, and that's sort of reflected in this polarization, is that people are doubtful about whether their lives have any meaning, for example. You know, well, why bother? What's the use of it? Who cares? It's like, what difference is it going to make in a million years, you know? And life is hard, and if you just have a nihilistic viewpoint, then it's easy to be swamped by doubts and existential angst and all of that. And like, I think that's a mistake, because I think that your life can be very meaningful. You want to break it down into something simple and accomplishable. Like, let's say you want to write a book. It's okay. How do you go about writing a book? Well, the first thing you do is decide how much time you can steal of your own and get away with it on a regular basis. And you might think, well, I'll wait till I have 8 hours of unbroken time and I'll sit down and write. It's like, no, you won't. First of all, you're never going to have 8 hours of unbroken time. That's never going to happen, especially as you get older and take on more responsibilities. And you don't have the discipline for that anyway, so that's not going to happen. It's like, you want to write a book? Start by stealing half an hour a day. Make it religious. Sit there for half an hour, even if you don't write anything. You should be able to get at least a sentence or two out. Well, let's say you write half a paragraph a day. Okay, so then we can do the arithmetic. So that's a paragraph every 2 days, or 3 paragraphs a week, so let's call that a page. Well, in a year, you've got 50 pages. All right, well, that's not bad. It's a quarter of a book, you know. And maybe once you've mastered the half an hour, you can extend it to an hour, you know. You're not going to get much past 90 minutes because your time isn't exactly your own. Other people are taking it all the time, especially if you're productive. You have to fight like a junkyard dog to get your own time. But so one of the things you can do is that if you have an aim of some sort, you want to break it down to what's necessary in the day and then iterate that. Your life is a repetition of days. And so it's really important to get the days right and then repeat them. And so a schedule can help with that too. It's like, okay, you schedule in the things you have to do so that your life doesn't get worse. Those are responsibilities. And then schedule in the things that you would like to do. Use the schedule as if it's your friend and not your tyrant. That's really useful. And computer schedules they're great for that. But you got to think, this is not my tyrannical father standing in front of me with a big whip, punishing me every time I make a mistake. That's not what this schedule is. It's my friend who's saying, let's have a really good day tomorrow. And that would be, well, we better get the mess out of the way a little bit because it'll just compound, and that's not good. But let's throw some things in there that might make life worth living a little bit.